RBI has decided to transfer a surplus of 1.76 lakh crores. That's almost double the estimated figure for FY20. The Economic Capital Framework guided the transfer amount, which is 3 times the 5-year average. We spoke to former RBI governor and member of the Jalan panel on the mechanics behind the decision, and he's confident that the RBI's balance sheet is in good shape, even after the capital transfer.
I wouldn't say it's a balancing act. We've done a technical report, taking everything into account, and I think arrived at the principles that we proposed, which have clearly been accepted by both the government and the Reserve Bank.
Right. Can you also help us understand how many more tranches will come, if at all, or does it only depend on any sort of surplus that the RBI has in that particular year?
Yeah, since according to the RBI press release, they've taken the lower bound of the range of 5.5%, and they are deciding to transfer the full amount in excess. So obviously there's nothing left for another tranche. I've obviously not seen the final accounts of the RBI for 2018-19, but from the press release, I gathered that they've taken the lower bound of 5.5%, and as a consequence, calculated the excess, and they're transferring the full amount this year, and therefore there's no other tranche left. The surplus transfer for next year will depend on whatever surplus the Reserve Bank has for 2019-20, and then they will have to look at the reserves at that point in time, what proportion they are of the balance sheet. Suppose they're less than 5.5%, then they'll have to retain part of the surplus so that the minimum 5.5% is maintained. They can also transfer more. They can also transfer more if they want to increase the reserves to 6.5 or to the limit of 6.5%. That'll depend on the Reserve Bank Board's decisions next year.
True, that's a very important clarification that you've given. So there's going to be no, surplus. There's going to be no other tranche. It all depends on the surplus transfer for next year. Because the government was, in a way, trying to get some sort of a comfort that if it's not a technical report, if there is a number that is, given, then possibly in the next upcoming fiscal years as well, they will see some sort of a breathing room coming in from the RBI. But that's an important clarification that it all depends on the surplus. But can we now safely say, Dr. Rakesh Mohan, that in case of any exigency, in case of any, unforeseen circumstances, the RBI has enough contingency funds with them that they can take care of the macroeconomic stability?
Yes, as far as according to the calculation that we've made, according to the risk assessment we've done, that we would say that the Reserve Bank balance sheet is in very good shape.
There was also a talk, sir, that, there is about 3.6 lakh crore rupees that is there with the RBI, when the panel initially sat down to discuss the modalities. What happens to that money? That money is still there with the RBI, or was it a part of the unrealized gains, just for the understanding's sake?
Yeah, as I explained to you, that there was excess attention to the liability side. You have to look at the asset side as well, on what the size of the balance sheet should be.
Right.
And the asset side depends on the policy mandate, both the preservation or addition or maintenance of foreign exchange reserves for external stability and domestic securities for monetary policy and domestic security purposes. And therefore, obviously, the liability side has to match that asset side. And as I said, that it is a complete error of previous calculations to make these kind of numbers, to reach these kind of numbers, and they included the magnitude of revaluation reserves. And suppose you came to the conclusion that the revaluation reserves are excess and they can be distributed, which be against normal accounting norms, but the consequence would be that you'd also have to sell foreign exchange reserves on the asset side if you had to do that. Just that those were clearly erroneous calculations, which I thought misled people unnecessarily and gave rise to this whole controversy. And now I think that this report has established the principles on which the Reserve Bank balance sheet should be looked at.